Hello and welcome to the Stansberry Investor Hour. I'm Dan Ferris. I'm the editor of Extreme Value and the Ferris Report, both published by Stansberry Research.
And I'm Corey McLaughlin, editor of the Stansberry Daily Digest. Today we talk with geopolitical strategist and author Peter Zeihan.
And Corey and I will talk about the conference, what we liked and what we absolutely loved.
And remember, if you want to let us know what's on your mind, email us at feedback@investorhour.com.
That and more right now on the Stansberry Investor Hour. Well, here we are at the conference once again in Las Vegas, back in Vegas this year. We were in Boston last year, and it's a lot of fun. And so we do a conference for 2 days, and then we do our alliance meeting on the third day, and we get lots of great speakers, don't we? I mean, we got Lance Armstrong this year.
Yeah, Lance Armstrong, Morgan Housel, Porter Stansberry.
Porter's back in the house.
And a whole lot more. I listened to you.
Me.
Today.
Yeah, me.
You're emceeing up there too?
Yeah, a little bit. And who did I hear? I heard Joel Littman. I heard Rick Rule. Heard a little bit of Daniel DiMartino Booth. Ben Mesrick was very interesting.
He was, yeah. Thought he was very interesting on talking about the GameStop experience. And, he, for people who don't know, he wrote a book that became the movie Dumb Money that's out right now about the whole GameStop experience. And also his interesting background as a writer and how he got into everything too was a little fascinating too.
He told good stories too. Yeah, he spoke right before me.
Right.
And I was sitting backstage listening to him talk about the Russian oligarchs. And he basically hung out with one of the oligarchs for a year, and he told the story. He called the guy up, and he was writing about him, and the guy knew that he was writing about him. And he called him up and he said, "Hey, it sounds like you might have killed this one guy." And the oligarch said, "Yes, it does sound that way." Just totally straight-faced. And then, he told the rest of the story. He said, "You got to understand, Russia in 1990 is not like America. Russia in the 90s, I think he said, is not like America. It's more like America in the 1890s, where if you disrespect me, I'm going to kill you."
Yeah, it's routine.
Yeah. So that was exciting. Not the usual thing that you hear at an investment conference.
Right, and he said he's coming out with a new book on Elon Musk and the first 6 weeks of when he took over Twitter.
Wow.
And didn't talk to Elon Musk for the book. I guess he had communication with him, but didn't talk to him for the book. And actually said he thinks that it'll be a better telling of the story without him, and comparing it to Walter Isaacson's book on Elon that just came out. That's kind of, when he said when you spend a lot of time around the character, like you get sympathetic to them, or you can't help it if you're flying around on private jets and whatever with the person. So he didn't talk to Elon Musk for his book, but it's called Breaking Twitter. It's going to come out in November, and Elon has broken Twitter, and he also said it's how Twitter maybe broke Elon too.
Wow,
and
that sounds interesting. You got a favorite speaker that you've heard besides me, of course?
You, of course. I was hanging on every detail of what you were saying.
Of course you were.
Yes.
Who wasn't?
It's a lot of stuff you've talked about before we've talked about before.
It is. And while we're talking about me, I did want to make a point that I failed to make on stage, which was I've been really bearish in the Stansberry Digest and any stage presentation anywhere for pretty much 2 solid years. And I'm still sort of there, but it's different now. I'm saying investing is back and income is back, mostly because you've got this wonderful opportunity to put money into treasuries yielding 5%, and you can sort of say, hey, make me a better proposition than that and be a real investor again. But I just wanted to make that point because I failed to make it anywhere else so far. It's not the same bearish song that it was. I'm singing a new song, Corey.
Good, yeah. Investing is back again. It's
all right. So your favorite besides me?
Besides you, okay. Was you got to pay attention to what Lance Armstrong was saying. Given his name recognition and notoriety. Doc Eifrig interviewed him. I talked to Doc afterward, and he said he took like a 3-hour nap afterward because he was the adrenaline was pumping in him so much that he was a little nervous during that interview. And they covered a lot, right? They talked about Lance Armstrong's, growing up in Texas, how he got into cycling, and then everything that followed, obviously. And it was interesting. It's talking about being sympathetic with the character. I didn't get the sense that he was still like all that sorry about what happened. Like he was, like he didn't do anything wrong. Still, like there's still that part of him that says like,
no kidding.
yeah, like everybody was blood doping and cycling at the time, and
right.
So, and he was in that situation, just wasn't going to pull the plug on being like the figure of American cycling at that time. Just wasn't in him. And he said he's done a lot of work to like figure out why that was. But I mean,
look, yeah. Let's face it. If you're Lance Armstrong, it's got to be good. When you're Lance Armstrong and you're winning all these things, and everybody knows you. A cyclist. Name 5 cyclists.
Right.
Name 2. I don't.
People still associate cycling with him.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Name 2. I can't name another one myself.
Right.
But yeah, I understand that pressure. Not that I've ever felt it. Not that I've ever been anything like that. But I get it. What else you got? Lance Armstrong and
I love listening to Morgan Housel.
Oh yeah, he's great.
He's
great writer.
Just great stories too.
I'm envious of him as a writer. I freely admit it.
Yeah, great writer. I was happy to meet him for like a minute, and so that was nice. Yeah, he had some great stories about the centuries-old sailing race that the guy was trying to fake out everybody that he was traveling around the world on the boat, when in reality he was just going around the Atlantic Ocean in a circle. And because he wanted to win this race so badly but his boat had broken down, and so he didn't. And it's all this fascinating stuff. And then the guy who was actually winning the race quit while he was ahead and didn't want to do the race anymore. The point was like manage your expectations in investing, and you won't be happy if you're always raising the expectation level for yourself or I guess your portfolio and that sort of thing. So, so Morgan Housel always brings some history and different stuff to the table that you haven't heard before.
Always a good historical perspective. And like I said, I'm envious as a writer. When I read his stuff, I get to the end of it and I say, damn, because I wish I'd done it and I wish I were that good at it. So.
Yeah, me too.
But his latest book is, I like the focus. There's a lot of books about, changing, how rapidly times are changing, how rapidly technology changes. But this book is about things that don't change, which I think is cool. I haven't read it yet, but it's in the pile.
I haven't either, yeah. But one of his posts that I remember when I was getting into this financial writing was just exactly that. It was titled The Things That Don't Change. Yeah. And it was there's like a list of like 10 things that would always be appealing no matter what, like cutting costs or more efficiency or that sort of stuff. And he used the example of Amazon and Jeff Bezos. Like all that was making selling books easier. Right. And it evolved into all kinds of different things. But the thing that didn't change was just like efficiency and making it easier for people to get what they wanted. Which is simple, but those are the things that don't change, that you can apply to different industries and all over the place.
Nice. So my favorites are really almost self-serving. When Joel Littman put up these slides about like Ben Graham, he had Ben Graham's 2 big books, Security Analysis and The Intelligent Investor, right up on the screen. I was like, wow. And he was talking about, the dot-com bubble, and how the equity market really needs to take a break because it's way ahead of the debt market and so forth, which is something I've written about in the digest. And I was thinking, man, am I competing with Joel now?
Yeah, you and Joel are on the same page for a while, right?
That's right, we're on the same page. I'm curious to see how long that lasts. And when he moves on, I'll be really scratching my head thinking, should I move on too? Because he's a very smart guy. He puts up a lot of charts and data, and I know behind that is even more work. So, and he's got 100 people working for him in his organization. It's pretty incredible. Also, who did I like? Well, I always like Rick Rule. I've known Rick forever. He's the first person I met in this business, but outside of the business, if that makes sense, back in like 1998 or something like that. I flew out to San Diego, and he had an analyst who was working with him on these water companies. That's been one of his things for years. And we went around to visit a couple of them. It was quite educational for me because I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
Like anything. So that was good fun. And I've known him forever. He and I have done presentations together, and he sort of helped me put together the commodity hypercycle portfolio that we have in extreme value that's crushed the market. I'm so proud of this. Since we started it in February, it has crushed the market. I mean, I'm just like, wow, I hope this keeps up. It's funny because, I make all these recommendations and it still just tickles me to death when they go really well. After 20 odd years of doing it, It's like, hey, I was right.
It should, yeah. And Rick, in one of his presentations, he kind of made that case for the lack of investment over the last couple decades in resources and copper. Mentioned your friend Copper.
Yep.
And so I just love listening to hear him talk. He's very self-deprecating humor too. It's always fun too.
He is. I feel like Rick gives 25 different speeches, and I've heard them all numerous times over the years, but they get better, and the material is updated and it's new. And I like the way, one of my favorite ideas of his, and he said it again today, is basically buy the beta. So if you want to buy oil, buy ExxonMobil, Chevron, Oxy, and that Occidental Petroleum, and that's it. And you're buying the beta in the oil market. You're not trying to ramp up and get extra return by buying some tiny little oil stock. And he said he made it broader into resources today when he was speaking. And he said, buy the beta in mining, buy the best quality mining companies. If you're buying uranium, you're buying Cameco, and if you're buying copper, you're buying Freeport, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a wonderful idea. I have a whole portfolio of those, that hypercycle portfolio. And the amazing thing is, you can buy those and make 5 or 10 times your money off the blue chips, if you hold them through the full cycle.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by that. I mean, these are dividend paying, cash gushing, great companies. Usually, if you're making 10% or 12% a year off of something like that, you're happy. But with these, when the mining cycle gets going, you can make, like I said, 5, 10 times your money, which is incredible. It's sort of and in fact, it's exactly like what you could have done with Amazon. When on the trip in Amazon and Apple and all of those, the trip from tens of billions in market cap to $1 trillion in market cap was pretty good for a lot of people, right?
Right.
So same thing there. So, like I said, my favorites are people who say stuff I agree with. That's what it sounds like, right?
Yeah.
But I'm only human.
Yes.
So overall, we're both on Team Stansberry, so we're going to say overall a great conference, right?
Right. I'm not going to say anything else. Yes.
It's just, we love it. We love what we do. We love everyone around us. We love all the speakers we get at our conference, and you will too. If you haven't been to a Stansberry conference, I really, honestly, truly, deep in my soul, believe you're missing something great.
Yeah, I will say. After COVID and not seeing people in person for a while that we would normally see, I don't take these things for granted, and being around actual people and colleagues is nice to just see people. There's people I haven't seen in a year. So yes, it's good. And if you've never been to one of these and are one of our subscribers, I think you should try to come, because you can talk to everybody, both the editors and analysts from Stansberry and the speakers, and hear a lot of great ideas and that we haven't even covered yet. So I'm excited about conferences. I'm a big conference guy, so I'm glad to be here. Glad to be talking with you in person, and I'm just thankful to be here.
All right. And if you'd have told me 10 years ago that we were going to have Lance Armstrong on the podium at our conference, I would have said, no, but here he is. So with that, let's go ahead and talk with our guest today. His name is Peter Zeihan. He is a brilliant geopolitical strategist. And of course, you know what, I'm not even going to tell you what we're going to talk about, because if you know what's happening in geopolitics right now, you already know what we're going to talk about. We're also going to catch up with him on what we talked about in the previous time that he was on in December of 2022. So let's do that right now. Let's talk with Peter Zeihan. Let's do it right now. Do you own any of America's 7 most dangerous stocks? These 7 stocks have been on a tear this year, driving about 75% of all the gains the S&P 500 has seen in the first half of 2023, and leaving the other 493 in the dust. But here's what most folks don't know. Owning even one of these 7 could be a dangerous mistake. That's because what's around the corner for the stock market could catch you off guard. It's a distinct pattern that happens roughly every 10 to 12 years. And each time it opens a rare window in the stock market where investors stand to create or lose huge amounts of wealth. Right now, it's on the verge of happening again. We put everything you need to know, including the names of those 7 stocks, in a new report that we'd like to send you today for free. Get the facts yourself. Go to www.stockstoavoid.com to get your free copy of this report. You can get the full list of the 7 most dangerous stocks and prepare for what's coming. Again, that's www.stockstoavoid.com for a free copy of our new report. All right, Peter, welcome back to the show. It's been a little while.
It has been.
It's been, actually, I looked it up. It's been since December of 2022, when a whole lot of people could talk about was the Ukraine war.
Sure. It's still going on, by the way.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard it's still going on. There's this other little conflict that's popped up recently. Israel. I feel like we should talk about that, and we will eventually, but I think we should pick up with Ukraine. I know everybody wants to talk about Israel. I promise we will. But I think we should pick up with Ukraine. Specifically, you were talking about what happened once they got past the muddy season. Mm-hmm. And what happened?
Sure. So the issue is that we saw in 2022 that the Ukrainians were able to launch a couple of relatively lightning attacks, and that the Russian logistical and training system was so abominable that the Ukrainians were able to capture very large chunks of their territory in a matter of days. We have definitely not seen that this time. The Russians used the intervening time between October of last year and the spring of this year to put into place massive fortifications that the world has not seen since at least the Second World War. And while the casualty ratios have been horrific for the Russians have proven willing to just throw more and more and more people. Some of the estimates that are probably a little bit more realistic suggest that the Russians are losing 2 people for every Ukrainian lost. And when you're defending, that shouldn't be happening. It should be at most flipped. But the Ukrainians don't have nearly as many men to spare as the Russians do. And if the Russians keep doing these partial mobilizations where they're pulling up 100,000 or so people at a time, they can keep up this pace of carnage for at least the next 3 or 5 years. So we haven't seen the breakthrough on the scale of what we saw in 2022. And until we do, and I'm not saying it will happen, but until we do see that, this sort of long grinding fight is honestly what warfare has looked like in this part of the world for most of recorded history.
That doesn't sound good.
It is not good for anyone.
Oh, so I wonder about, as an investor, I kind of wonder about countries like Poland.
It's a reasonable concern.
Yeah, it's a reasonable concern. It's kind of nearby, okay? But, it's a decent economy, and there are public companies. You can invest there. A regular guy like me can buy the Poland ETF.
Well, let me underline a couple of things. First of all, if the Russians are successful in Ukraine, that's not the end of the war. People forget that this is the 9th post-Soviet military conflict that the Russians have initiated.
9th?
Yeah, this is the most famous one. Okay. And if the Russians are to get what they feel they need to rebuild their outer defensive perimeter, that includes the city of Warsaw. So if the Russians are successful here, we will have a military assault that eventually will consume 5 NATO countries. So the smart play is to stop it here Stop it firmly so that that never happens. So keep that in mind, whatever your political views are on Ukraine, Russia, and the rest. This is not the end of the story. We're only midway through the story. And then second, there is a clock that is being run out. While the Russians have a lot more men than Ukraine does, the birth rate in the Russian system collapsed back in 1992. The Russians do have a lot more men than the Ukrainians have, roughly 8 million men in their 20s. But that's the last generation. The Russian birth rate collapsed with the post-Cold War era, and this is the last generation of fighters that the Russians can bring at scale to a conflict. So once they've gone through these people, or once they reach their 30s, that is really the end of Russia's capacity to launch an offensive conflict. So if we can keep Ukraine alive and keep the military conflict sufficiently contained so no nukes fly, the end of Russia is in sight now. And we will never have to worry about anything like this ever again if we can make it that far.
You know, Peter, I certainly don't have your knowledge, but the end of Russia doesn't sound like a pleasant time for tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people.
Well, one of the many things we've seen in the industrial era is that as people industrialize and they move into cities, they just have fewer kids.
Right.
So the Russian situation is certainly kind of an outlier in terms of just how bad it is because of Soviet mismanagement, the post-Soviet collapse. I don't mean to suggest that everybody is Russia, but everyone is dealing with some version of this. And actually, I think the Russians will outlast, say, the Germans. The German birth rate collapsed almost a century ago. And a century on, this is the final decade where they're going to have enough workers to even pretend to have an industrial system. So versions of this conversation need to be had for 50 countries this decade and another 100 countries over the next 2.
Totalitarian regimes seem to be really bad for demographics.
Well, if you are going to have a positive demography that generates enough children to carry the system forward, your industrialization process can't be so fast and so brutal that it uproots people's lives completely. And they also have to have hope for the future.
You mean like sweeping through the countryside wholesale and forcing everyone to move into a city? Just off the top
that
of
would be a great example of what not to do.
Okay.
And so, obviously the Russians did that. We're only now seeing the impact of Stalinization.
Right.
But the Chinese did it faster. The Chinese have gone from a pre-industrial population structure as recently as the 70s to by the time we get to 2030, we will be well into an advanced post-industrial collapse. I mean, all in one human lifetime.
Gee, you're a fun guy.
Whee.
No, actually, it's funny. If somebody says, hey, I say, well, I interviewed Peter Zeihan, they say, who is he? I would say, no, not. You're a famous guy, but
I feel special.
Nobody knows everybody, and I would say, he's the demography guy practically because the United States, China, Russia, who else? Every developed Western nation?
Well, the countries that are in the thick of it and where this is probably their last decade. China's at the top of that list, but also on that list is Italy and Korea and Germany. Right around turn of the decade, going into the first half of the following decade, then you're talking about maybe the Spanish, Thailand at the end of the 2030s.
Japan?
Japan's a weird one. If you had asked me back, 15 years ago, I probably would have put them in kind of the vanguard because they were the world's demographically oldest country, oldest age structure, and most rapidly aging. But over the last 35 years, they have offloaded a lot of their industrial base, which kind of insulates them from the workforce collapse. They've really focused on the knowledge economy, and they bring the money from their earnings overseas to maintain their tax base. But most of all, they've been able to bring up their birth rate bit by bit by bit. So they're still old. They haven't fixed this, but they've slowed it down. And so they're no longer in the top 10 for most rapidly aging countries. They've managed to buy themselves a little bit of time.
So historically, is there an example where you can show me, this is how bad it gets. This is how important demography is. You better be careful or you'll become who?
Well, the problem is that, no, we don't have a good historical analog. Most of this is directly or indirectly an outcome of industrialization. And
I see, because workforces moved so radically.
Exactly.
Flooding into cities, et cetera, et cetera.
And when you're on the farm, kids are free labor. You have a whole bunch of them. When you're in the city, kids are just really expensive pets. You have fewer of them. It's just math.
That's a little brutal, but I guess it is true to an extent. Everybody who has children and lives even, suburb cities or whatever.
Well, I mean, would you want 8 kids living in a condo?
No.
But on the farm, you want 8 kids because that way you don't have to hire anyone.
Yeah, we need more kids, you say, on the farm, right? And so we don't have an analog.
Yeah, the closest, and they're poor.
Okay.
The end of the Roman Empire, the last couple of centuries, there were a series of plagues that went through all of the Mediterranean and wiped out half the population. That obviously contributed to the collapse of Rome. And the second one would be the Black Plague, which gutted the middle part of the age pyramid, people in their 20s and their 30s. Wow. And that changed the labor structure. And as horrific as it was, it actually set the stage for what we now recognize to be skilled labor, because all of a sudden there was a labor shortage and every little unit of labor we had to do better. And so the countries that could adapt to that did very well over the centuries. The first few decades were a hot mess for everybody.
I see. Okay. So we got to talk about Israel.
Sure.
We can't not talk about Israel. Now, I didn't hardly know anything about this country, and I just did some, Googling around a little bit. And I thought, it's really the second biggest GDP in the region? Second only to Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely. As long as you don't consider Turkey part of the region.
Okay.
Which a lot of people don't.
I kind of wouldn't, would you?
With the Middle East, everything is about where you draw the lines.
Yeah.
And so Turkey has definitely an industrialized economy versus the rest of the region, which is resource-based, versus Israel, which is tech-based. So, it's, if you do include Turkey, it's number 3.
Okay. But a sizable economy.
Yes.
And, when it
with 8 million people.
Yeah, with 8 million people was my next comment. And I looked and I thought, well, there, Checkpoint Software is based in Haifa, I think it is. Mobileye, I believe, is in Jerusalem. There's between the two of them, huge tens of billions of market cap. I think, right there.
After 1990, the Israelis made a very cognizant decision that there was only so much that you could do with industry if you didn't have the population skilled enough to develop the technology behind it. And there was a lot of friction in the relationship between Israel and the United States and Israel and Europe, because the Israelis, almost to a Chinese scale, were stealing tech. And so they decided to go in the business of making tech. And when your whole country gets behind something, industrial policy for a small country is not too difficult. Right. And they were able really to get into software and high-tech development. And that has proven to have any number of applications for their broader economy and exportable products and software, which you don't have to worry about security, physical security, when you're exporting software because it's all digitized. You don't have to worry about ships coming out and maybe somebody cooking off a rocket. So they found a model that, to this point, has proven to be fairly successful for them.
Right. I was going to ask you about the geography, too, of being is it a desert country? That's how I think of it.
Yeah, you're thinking about it right.
Yeah,
the only part of the country that gets any meaningful rain is the Golan.
Okay, so
and nobody settles there because it's the Golan.
Right. So it's Nevada with technology instead of gambling. No. That's a joke.
It's not too far off.
Not too far off. And tell me, my knee-jerk reaction, I'm a contrarian, I want to go where blood is running in the streets, and I know that's horrible to talk about.
You're going to love Gaza then.
Yeah, because it's terrible what's happening. So I don't want to be crass about it, but it is what we do here. And I think, George Gilder actually uses the term innovation per capita. Innovation per capita off the charts. A sizable economy in the region, and if there's a war there and nobody wants to be there, I want to go there, and I want to say, well, maybe I need to buy the Israel ETF coming up here pretty soon. And to me, I'm not you, but when I look at something like this, I guess it's the same as with Russia-Ukraine. We all think the same thing if we're not you. We're saying, is it going to explode into a larger conflict? What are the odds of that?
Sure.
What are those dynamics? Because if it is, I don't want to buy the Israel ETF. If it isn't, this is the buying moment.
Let me give you 3 things. 1, very positive, and 2, more long-term negative. So first, the positive one. The only time the Palestinians have ever mattered from an economic point of view is when another country of size, typically Saudi Arabia, decides to get involved diplomatically. And in the past, in the 70s specifically, that gave us OPEC. So the capacity of Saudi Arabia, if it gets riled up on this topic, is not insignificant. But the Saudis have been edging away from the Palestinians ever since the formation of OPEC, especially since after 1979 and the rise of the Ayatollah in Iran. Because as soon as the Shia of Iran started to become persnickety, the Saudis realized that they had much bigger fish to fry much closer to home. And so the government of Saudi Arabia over the last year has been edging closer and closer and closer at their own pace, at their own decision-making process, towards a formal peace treaty with Israel.
Oh, that emanates from
Saudi Arabia. That is not us.
Okay.
That is not Israel. That is Saudi Arabia was trying to make this happen. And so Iran, it appears, has been nudging Hamas to throw some spanners into the works, and there's nothing like an invasion of an open-air prison with 2.3 million people in it to generate spanners. So the Iranian hope here is that this scraps the peace process, and they may get what they want. It's too soon to know. So the Saudis are having a generational fight over how important the Palestinians are to them mentally and culturally.
Okay, I've heard you talk about this. The older generation.
Older generation is very pro-Palestine.
Right.
The younger generation couldn't care less. And sooner or later, the king, older generation, is going to die. Arguably, he's already a vegetable. And that leaves Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, who, if he's not assassinated, is probably going to be king for the next 40 or 50 years.
Excuse me, if he's not assassinated.
It happens in royal families all the time.
You've
seen Game of Thrones, right?
Yes, I have.
Basically,
Okay.
Saudi Arabia is a dry Game of Thrones with fewer dragons.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, but as soon as you mention it, I start thinking, well, the odds of this are greater just because that's the dynamic in that type of regime.
Even if the older generation tends to dominate today, I don't think we're going to have an economic war like we did with OPEC, because the generation that's making all the actual operational decisions doesn't want it. So odds are, from an economic point of view, this is very tightly contained and limited.
Okay, and my two long-term negatives?
The long-term concerns are one demographic, one political. There's a political...
One demographic. Why am I not surprised?
Yeah, exactly. There's a political class whose name escapes me at the moment in Israel that's basically a bunch of religious Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox folks who are not employed in the traditional sense. They're a combination of religious scholars and keeping the faith alive. And their taxes are very low, their subsidies are very high. It turns out that because of that, they're net beneficiaries from the state, and they have lots and lots and lots and lots of kids. So they don't contribute much. They're not part of that tech story we discussed, and they're multiplying like rabbits. And you play that forward for 50 years. And they are now, based on who's drawn the line, somewhere between 10% and 30% of the population. So from an economic point of view, absolute dead weight. So the efficiency of the Israeli workforce is not going up, it's going down. And it doesn't matter if you're economically dead weight or not, you can vote. Right. So we're getting ever more disconnected, unprofessional, non-technical governments in Israel. And you can easily make the argument today that the current government, where these folks are a huge chunk of it, are part of the reason why the Israelis missed everything. Because you now have people in all the ministries who have no idea what they're doing.
Missed everything, you mean the big sort of intelligence...
Right. Israel supposedly is the platinum standard for intelligence gathering. Gaza is supposed to be the thing they watch the most, and they missed all of it.
Right. And there are, of course, batty theories coming out of the woodwork as to why that is.
Well, and they've got batty ministries, so some of them might actually be right. But when you've got a system where the population is becoming less competent and the government is becoming less competent for structural reasons that have nothing to do with politics directly, that's a problem if you're a value-added economy.
Okay. Was that both of them, or was that one of them? That was demographic and
the political.
Outcomes.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. So it's really... It's intertwined.
Yeah, I mean, the only way that you could potentially remove that from contention is if you're not a net taxpayer, you don't vote. That's an interesting political innovation. Or we will no longer subsidize this class so they don't all have 6 kids. But you have to get that through a vote.
One would think it would be easier to get that vote done now and
than later.
Not 20 years from now.
You may have seen some of the debates over judicial reforms and judicial coups. That's basically what's going on here. So you've got this rising part of the population that is more and more burden on the state. And then you've got the judicial system that is still kind of a remnant of the old professional system. And the two are coming into clash. With every day that passes, that rising population is getting more and more power. So the question is, can the judicial process rein them in, or is it the other way around? And that's the core of the debate.
Right. The Fed wants you to believe they've got inflation under control, but I believe we've only seen the beginning of a devastating new crisis. And if you don't prepare now, you could see your savings evaporate as inflation and interest rates soar even higher over the next 2 years. It all traces back to a golden thread that ties together the biggest financial calamities in America's history. But it seems the entire financial world is falling into this very same denial trap that led to massive devastation the last time this crisis played out. If you know your history, you know there will be winners and losers, and now is when you decide which one you'll be. I've spelled it all out in an urgent new report. Go to www.bankrun2023.com to get your free copy. I'll also show you how to get my complete playbook for navigating this crisis, including the 3 critical steps to take immediately. Again, that's www.bankrun2023.com for your free copy of my new report. So the one narrative that says we were so wrapped up with this judicial thing that we didn't see Gaza coming.
I'd say it would be broader than that, just that the ministers are so incompetent that they don't know how to run the institutions they've been put in charge of.
What do you really think of Israeli politicians? Don't hold back on us here. We let it all hang out.
Well, I mean, if you want to put an American analog to this, basically we have an Israeli government who was formed specifically to fight the culture war. And this is where it led.
Oh, yeah, that isn't good. All right, so gosh, I don't know if you've left me wanting to buy the Israel ETF right here. As a trade, I think as a short-term trade, if the world realizes that, Palestine not being an economic power is probably not a big
oil isn't produced there, it's really not consumed there, and it's not transited through there. So it's only if someone on the outside decides to make it an issue.
All right. And, we're not going to hold you to anything here. Just your thoughts about
feel free, people do.
Okay, about where this winds up. Where does this end up?
Oh, God. So what's happening right now is the Israelis are on the verge of a mass invasion of the Gaza Strip. Mm-hmm. Now, the Gaza Strip is only I'm going to get the number wrong, 250 square miles. It's small. Mm-hmm. Or is it kilometers? It's really small. Yeah. It's like twice the size of the District of Columbia, but it's got 2.3 million people. So you've got people living in an inner city style compression with no hinterland, no power generation, no food production. Mm. Everything comes from the outside. And the Israelis, as they've proven that their intelligence gathering is not as good as we thought it was, want to go in and liquidate, at a minimum, the faction that carried out the attacks. The problem is, if they knew where that faction was, the attacks would have never happened. Mm. So they're just going to go in and destroy all of Hamas. And I don't mean to suggest that these are nice people. They are not. But they're going to have to go house to house for 2.3 million people to destroy both the de facto government and then any factions associated with it. The human cost of that is going to be gargantuan. Yeah. And, I can see why some people are already starting to yell at the Israelis. But on the flip side, in terms of casualties per population, this is like 10 times as bad as what we went through at 9/11. And I can tell you as an American who remembers this very, very well, we didn't give a flying what anyone else in the world thought when we felt we needed to go down and hunt down those people. Mm-hmm. So what this does to the political system in Israel, that's actually the small story. What this does to the culture of Israel is something that is going to reverberate for decades.
It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound like...
There is no way that this gets clean.
Yeah. Does Israel have enough people to do this, to go into Gaza?
If you're willing to take a very cold approach to casualties, yeah, they got the skills to do it.
Wow. Okay, I almost wished I hadn't asked you that. I'm serious.
Well, I mean, if you want to get really cold, this has already happened 100 times in Ukraine. Mm. I mean, you basically what I just described, that was the Russian war effort for the first year, going into cities and cleansing them.
Mm. Brutal.
Yeah, very.
Will humanity ever get past this sort of thing?
If one person's in charge, sure. But China's a great example of how that goes to shit.
Yeah. And again, I think there are some folks in Western China in camps that would kind of
have very different opinions.
Different opinions about.
Yeah, the only way you get rid of opinions is to get rid of the people who have the opinions.
Yes.
And that's never pretty.
Right. And speaking of China, and thank you for dealing
we
with
hadn't talked about China yet. That's right. Sorry.
Yeah. Right. I mean, look, when you have Peter Zeihan near you, you talk about the current war, you update on the previous war, and then you talk about China.
China.
So now we got to talk about China.
Sure. So very, very short version.
All right. Very short.
Their industrial demographic experience is by far the most extreme that we have ever seen from any country ever. And their demographic decline now, by their own numbers, assuming their numbers are accurate, is already the most extreme in the human record. And China will cease to exist as a unified, industrialized nation state within 10 years at this point, assuming nothing goes wrong and assuming their government is very good at managing the decline. But we have seen Chairman Xi basically gut the entire system of any source of information that might prove useful to a government. And so he is now making decisions in a black box, blind.
When I talk to people like folks from Bridgewater and other sort of global macro investor types, I never, and I mean, Peter, never in the past, like, what have I been doing this podcast for maybe 5 years now, since 2018? No one talks about this. I mean, absolutely no one. You have a monopoly on this topic with China. Yeah, woo, good for Peter. I mean, I hope it's worth something to you. I hope you can push the pricing on that monopoly. Yeah. But no one, I mean, I never hear anyone say anything about China except, it's usually some version of, they'll figure this problem out, and they'll figure that problem out, and they'll figure that problem out, and they're going to be the next big power in the world, and that's all there is to it.
Hard no.
Hard no.
No, we are looking at national collapse within 10 years.
Wow. Like, is there another guy I can interview who will back you up on this?
Well, I mean, okay. You've been doing this for 5 years. Let me at least partially explain why this hasn't really popped up. A lot has gone down in the last 5 years. Right. We've had the Trump administration, which was like living inside of a bullhorn. Chairman Xi has created the world's most dramatic and tight cult of personality in human history, much more than Mao ever did. So information flow just isn't there. And then we had COVID, where all the numbers were scrambled, assuming we could get them at all. So it's only really since about April of this year that we're being able to see through some of the fog. And what we're realizing is that China isn't peaking now. They're not just about to peak. It's that they actually peaked before all of this noise. And then we missed all the data revisions. We missed all the political shifts because all these other things were going on. And now we're on the backside of it.
If we can clarify, you're talking demographic peak.
Yes. So we now know that China's population didn't peak in 2022. It probably peaked back in 2012. We now know that India didn't become the world's largest population last year. That was probably 7 years previous. We now know that Americans didn't become, on average, younger than average Chinese. That probably happened 10 years ago as well. And so we're all in the process of reassessing. And if you're one of those China bulls, to have this sort of a dramatic shift, it's only been 6 months since the data started getting kind of realized. So people will get there. My biggest concern is that the cult of personality is now so tight that they've started to not even collect certain types of data that are really baseline economic indicators. And so we might not know that we've had a hard crack in China until the product just stops arriving. So do I think China is doomed? Absolutely. Will I live out to see what's next? Absolutely. But every day China is still there. That's a gift, because it's one more day we have to prepare for a world without Chinese manufacturers. And I would really like us to have most of this stuff, at least in the process of being up and running, before we lose access to the world's workshop.
I heard a good story, speaking of all these folks I've been talking to. One of them told me about a Chinese diplomat that he spoke with, and the guy was talking about the economy and the productivity and the manufacturing and all of these things, and how great it was going to be, and what they were going to, all the things they were going to do. And then the fellow who I know was asking the questions. He said, I hate to bring it up, but there are human rights issues here. People are disappearing in droves. People just disappear in that country, and you never hear from them again. He said, I'm sorry. And the answer came, well, no, you don't understand. That's not my department. That happens in another department. And my friend used the phrase like Sovietized, right? It's like, we're not in charge of abducting people and making them disappear. We're just in charge of making the economy run right.
Yeah, but even at the height of Stalinization, which was the most brutal the Soviet system was, there was still a decision-making apparatus at the top that had information flows. There were still people that Stalin would discuss things with and delegate to. That doesn't exist in China. It's just Xi.
I see. So everybody reports to Xi, in other words.
Yeah, and he's closed off most lines of communication, so he's just broadly unaware. He's the only decision maker, and he doesn't have the information he needs to be any decision maker. And so things get stalled, things get dropped, and we're seeing these disconnects through the entire system now.
Wow. We need to get you back on here to just talk about China a whole lot.
Well, we're running out of time, so chop chop.
Yeah. All right, so
chop and bring me back.
Yeah, I know.
You wait 5 years.
I got you. Yeah, we're not going to wait 5 years. No, we'll definitely have you back like within the year, or within 6 or 12 months or something, just to focus on that. Because, again, I'm going to predict that even if I wait a year to get you back, no one who actually allocates tens of billions of dollars in that direction is going to be talking about it. I can feel it. Like I hear nothing. You're the one and only voice saying this.
Well, the newest information out of the Shanghai Academies of Science, which is basically the people who interpret the data, the state data, they're now saying openly that the housing overbuild in China is enough units to put up somewhere between 1.5 and 3 billion people. Yeah. A 100 to a 200% overbuild in housing.
Whoa.
And this is the primary source of savings for most of the population. So the information is coming out in the aftermath of April, and it's going to be folded into decision making at some point. The question is, how soon can people disengage? I mean, we're already seeing that FDI into China has now been negative for a couple of months. We are well past the start of the stampede.
And I'm going to guess that there's not going to be a whole lot of immigration making up the difference.
If they took every migrant available on the planet, it might buy them 4 years.
Wow.
It's a big mountain to move.
Okay, so the other thing I would tell somebody who said, who's Peter Zeihan, is, he's the end of globalization guy.
Yeah, that's fair.
So the narrative I consistently hear is that the two-power narrative with China and the United States, that's not what you're saying.
No.
You're saying I don't know, what do we call it? Many power? Everybody makes his own, grows their own food and manufactures their own cars? And
some version of autarky. Yeah, the problem with that theory is it assumes that everyone will be on their own, and they're not going to be. We're going to have a series of regional groupings that are more coherent than others. And the largest one is, to oversimplify, the Western Hemisphere, because the U.S. has a century and a half of experience of keeping outside powers out. I'm not suggesting that all of Latin America is going to be an American colony, not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that a lot of the security issues and a lot of the demographic issues don't punch into the Western Hemisphere. The demographic structure for Latin America writ large is broadly positive. And even in countries where it's starting to turn, say Brazil, they have a minimum of another 30 years. And if you don't have to worry about a war, that's another big plus. And the Western Hemisphere on its own is a significant net exporter of both food and energy. So a lot of the inputs that we need to prepare for a post-China environment are regional. And then there are countries in the Eastern Hemisphere that we're going to bring along for the ride. So the Japanese have found a way to get along with both sides of the American political aisle. They're the only country that's figured that out. Good for them. That was smart. Southeast Asia looks pretty good. The Australians already have a free trade agreement with the United States. There are pieces that, for whether cultural or political or strategic reasons, that we find useful and we find to be partners.
Right.
And so that kind of extended friends and family network is something that is going to persist. But if you're not part of that network, you either have to go it alone or you have to find your own local network, and those are much smaller. So I can see kind of a greater Turkey or a greater France doing reasonably well. But those are really the only Eastern Hemispheric zones where you might have a power that is stable enough themselves, that can manufacture stuff themselves, that can take care of energy and food themselves, that's worth attaching to. But you'll have to attach on their terms.
I see. All right. I think we're actually at the point where we can ask our final question, which
Sure.
you've done this before, and I hope you don't remember it. It works better
don't.
that way. Good. Works better that way. Same question for every guest, no matter what the topic, even if it's not a financial topic.
All right.
And it is simply, if you could leave our listeners with a single thought today, what would you like to leave them with?
China has spent the last 40 years becoming the workshop of the world. 35 trillion US in sunk costs for the industrial plant. We don't move on from that overnight. Now, we don't need to relocate the whole 35 trillion, but we do need to double the size of the industrial plant in North America. That is simultaneously the greatest pulse of inflation in our history and the greatest prospects for economic growth in our history. And doing that build out, how we do that build out, how we prioritize, how we pay for it, how we do it in a period of restricted labor supplies, that is going to define the economics of North America for the next 30 years. And it's going to define the human condition for the remainder of this century. So again, every day that China lasts is a gift because it makes that adjustment process that much less painful and dramatic.
All right. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, Peter. Always a lively, interesting discussion. And, like I said, we're definitely going to get you back here well
for me.
before China collapses. All right. So thanks again.
No problem.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Stansberry Investor Hour. To access today's notes and receive notice of upcoming episodes, go to investorhour.com and enter your email. Have a question for Dan? Send him an email. feedback@investorhour.com. This broadcast is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered personalized investment advice. Trading stocks and all other financial instruments involves risk. You should not make any investment decision based solely on what you hear. Stansberry Investor Hour is produced by Stansberry Research and is copyrighted by the Stansberry Radio Network.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates. You should not treat any opinion expressed on this program as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or follow a particular strategy, but only as an expression of opinion. Neither Stansberry Research nor its parent company or affiliates warrant the completeness or accuracy of the information expressed on this program, and it should not be relied upon as such. Stansberry Research, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not under any obligation to update or correct any information provided on the program. The statements and opinions expressed on this program are subject to change without notice. No part of the contributor's compensation from Stansberry Research is related to the specific opinions they express. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Stansberry Research does not guarantee any specific outcome or profit. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this program. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this program may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as a recommendation that is appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this program. Before acting on information on the program, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor.